Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Staying Alive in the Academic World, the Importance of the Joseph Sandler Psychoanalytic Research Conference. I am Rogério Lerner. I am a member of the Brazilian Psychoanalytic Society of São Paulo and a professor at the University of São Paulo and co-chair of the research training program and the Joseph Sandler Psychoanalytic Research Conference, a member of the research committee of IPA and FEPAL, and of the editorial board of the Psychoanalytic Quarterly. I am associate editor of the Journal of Psychoanalysis and Psicologia USP. So the structure of this webinar is the following. I will make a very brief presentation and introduction, and then we will pass the mic to Marianne Leuzinger-Bohleber, and then I will speak a little more, and then we will have the talk of Clara Schejtman, some discussion, and a Q&A session. Please submit your questions from the Q&A section in the bottom Zoom bar. Questions are anonymous. Panelists will receive the questions and will be able to answer them. Press the button in the bottom toolbar that says CC to enable the subtitles. Remember that this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the IPA webpage and YouTube. You will be sent a link to the recording in the days following the webinar. Participants can only interact through the Q&A. Chat and microphone functions are not available in the webinar format. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Marianne Leuzinger-Bohleber. She was director in charge of the Sigmund Freud Institute in Frankfurt, Germany, and she's a professor for psychoanalysis at the University of Kassel, senior research fellow at the University in Mainz. She's training analyst of the German Psychoanalytical Association and the International Psychoanalytical Association. She's chair of the research committee for clinical. She was chair of the research committee for clinical, conceptual, epistemological, and historical research of IPA, vice chair for Europe of the research board of IPA, chair of the IPA subcommittee for migration and refugees, and she's then is member of the committee. She received the prestigious Mary Seguner Award in 2016, the Haskell Norman Prize for Excellence in Psychoanalysis in 2017, the Robert Wallenstein Fellowship, and the IPA's Outstanding Scientific Achievements Award in 2023. Clara Schejtman is a permanent professor and research director at the University of Buenos Aires and University of Belgrado in Argentina. She's a training analyst and chair of the Babies, Children, and Adolescents Department at the Argentinian Psychoanalytic Association. She's a faculty member of the research training program and a member of the research board of IPA. She's a psychoanalyst in private practice and supervisor. She's the author of numerous publications and books by Routledge, Acadia, Wayne, Handbook of Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health, and she received the Psychoanalytic Research Exceptional Contribution Award of IPA in 2013. Please, Marianne, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Rogério, for the kind introduction. It is a great pleasure to be invited to this webinar, and I think the title exactly characterizes one of the main visions and aims of the Joseph Sandler Conference. As I will shortly summarize the founders of the Sandler Conference, and I think that's still true for all of us, we think that being alive in academia and to strengthen our presence in academia is essential for the future for our discipline. For in the academical, the doors are opened to the next generation of psychoanalysts, of researchers, but also of critical citizens all over the world. But as you all know, the relationship between psychoanalysis and the university was a complicated one from the very beginning. You remember that Freud, even in 1910, he was thinking about integrating his new scientific discipline into the medical organization of Auguste Forel, medical psychology and psychotherapy. But then, fortunately, in the New Year's Eve 1910, he decided instead to found an independent scientific organization, the International Psychoanalytic Association. And this step what made it possible that psychoanalysis developed an own independent way of understanding what psychoanalysis is, what kind of a science it is, what is important to psychoanalysis, and so on. And it was never swallowed, as Freud feared, by the world of medicine, of psychology, or academia in general, because Freud was convinced that psychoanalysis is much more. With his knowledge to the unconscious fantasies and conflicts, it may contribute to a wide range of academic disciplines, from medicine to cultural anthropology, psychology, but also social sciences, and so on. This vision was important, but times have changed in the last 120 years. And I want to give you an impression in my short introduction that each generation of psychoanalysts has to find its own relationship to psychoanalysis and the universities. Can you show the next slide, please? Next slide. I myself made my psychoanalytic training during the highlight days of the student revolution in Zurich. And the zeitgeist at that time was, as you all know, was kind of characterized by protest against institutions. We thought that universities are old-fashioned, that they are patriarchal, authoritarian. And in Germany, we thought that many of the professors are still old National Socialists. And there was a big rebellion. Please show the next slide against the university. Next slide, please. The next slide. So we wanted to have a vision of society, and in there, psychoanalysis played an important role, but the impetus went against the institution of university. What a contrast to nowadays. Please, next slide. We all know that now we have a worldwide terrible attack on democracies. And it is interesting that the attacks on democracy is not only the independence of law or of press, of education, it's always the attacks on science. That was true in times of fascism, of National Socialism. It's true in Russia of Putin. It's true, unfortunately, also in the States. Please show the next slide. So now the students, they are fighting for the university. They hope that the university, as Harvard, will stand up and save the freedom to think, to research. Please, the next slide. So we are all very much concerned what happens to this science. And personally, I'm very grateful that IPA, as I will show in a minute, has kind of seen this danger coming and has established stable institutions for research within the IPA in the last 3 decades. Many of my colleagues have done a wonderful job, have worked and had a lot of controversial discussions. But now, as you will see, the Joseph Sandler Conference, the research training program, and the funding organization, they are stable institutional structures. And in contrast to my generation, the generation now realizes that institution can also be a protection of space to think, to research, and also a space to treat clinicians. So next slide, please. Let me just go a little bit more into details. The heroes of our time at that time was, for instance, in Germany, Alexander Mitscherlich and Alfred Lorenzer. They fought publicly against the dark past of the German state. And they made a very important contribution to understand unconscious determinants, which led to National Socialism, to anti-Semitism, and also to the Holocaust. They were very much in contact with other heroes of our generations, the leaders of the so-called social school for Frankfurt School for Social Research, Theodor Adorno, or his pupil, Habermas, Jürgen Habermas, and of course also Herbert Marcuse. In Zurich, one of the heroes was Paul Pareben, who was in very close contact with Mitscherlich and the Frankfurt School as well, and also as an ethno-psychoanalyst in contact with the French ethno-psychoanalysis, for instance, Georges Sévreux. Next slide, please. So in the center of that time was that psychoanalysis, which got a very important function for the students at that time. Some people even called that it was the meta science of that time, that psychoanalysis was appreciated because it is a science of the so-called dark enlightenment. It was the main aim to analyze the unconscious fantasies and conflicts of individuals and in the society in order to explain the very complex and dark topics like National Socialism, anti-Semitism, which led to the Holocaust. Connected to that was a great skepticism against academic and what at that time we understood as positivistic science. So Jürgen Habermas, for instance, said that the interest of Sigmund Freud for natural science, neurosciences, was a scientific self-misunderstanding of psychoanalysis. He made a plea to understand psychoanalysis as a critical hermeneutic. This was an important debate at that time and had a great influence, at least in Europe. We had a kind of a revolution in psychiatry, in educational sciences, but also at the university. Many of the structures changed, and I think we still profit from these changes. But at the same time, seen from now, we also realize some of the dark sides. And this is now my personal perception. I don't know how other colleagues of this generation think, but when I think back, I had to discover also in myself that at that time we had kind of a self-idealization of psychoanalysis. We thought that psychoanalysis can do everything. It can explain the Holocaust, it can explain anti-Semitism, it can explain fascism, everything. And this was a kind of an idealization, which unfortunately, because it's a defense mechanism, was connected also to devaluation and a kind of arrogancy towards other academic disciplines. To make it a long story very short, I mean, we know now that, for instance, explanation of the Holocaust, of such a terrible topic, of the break of civilization, as Adorno called it. Of course, psychoanalysis can and must make its contribution on some unconscious determinants of such a topic, but that is not sufficient. We need also the historians, we need the sociologists, we need the economists. I think we need many other scientific approaches to understand what happened at that time and to learn from history. So I think a more modest attitude is more appropriate. In my generation, it also led to kind of blind eyes. For instance, we didn't realize we were so much in love with us, ourselves and psychoanalysis. We didn't realize that the CBT, the cognitive behavioral and behavioral therapists, for instance, to give just one example, that, we detested them. We thought that they are positivistic kind of researchers. We didn't want to have anything to do with them. But they were very clever. They made studies and they got into the university and became more and more successful. And they got into the positions which in the 60s and 70s were kind of taken by the analysts. So psychoanalysis was more and more marginalized. And I think it's not only the evil zeitgeist, we also should reflect on our own dark sides, which didn't kind of reflect on the changing and the transformation of the zeitgeist. So please, next slide. But the good message is that fortunately, not all the analysts had such blind eyes. For instance, personalities like Bob Wallerstein, Otto Kernberg, Joseph Sandler, Daniel Widlischer, Peter Fonagy, Bob Andy, and many others, they were critically thinking about this development, particularly about the split between the clinicians and the researchers. I don't have the time to go into it, but because we had kind of this arrogancy towards the university, that was not a good motivation for the young generation to try to make this difficult tightrope, to have a full analytic training as a psychoanalyst on the one hand, but also to make an analytic training, which is difficult, very difficult. But I mean, if you have to think that your colleagues think you are a betrayer of psychoanalysis if you work at the university, that is very demotivating. So we lost a lot of gifted people. And these people I just mentioned, they had a vision. The split is not good between clinician and researcher. We all belong to the same boat. And for the future of our discipline, we need each other. And this vision led to the institutional structures, which I already have mentioned. The research committee of the IPA was funded and became a permanent committee. Then the research training was established. I think Rogério will talk about it in a minute. And the Joseph Sandler Conference as an annual research conference was established with the main aim to build bridges between the researchers and the clinicians. And that's what we do also in Buenos Aires this time. And that's why we think you should all come, even hybrid, and listen to the spirit of future. We also did this open door review. Maybe you are interested, you can download it. It gives an overview of the state of the art of empirical research. And what is still quite topical is the introduction, because we worked very hard to understand the different research cultures in the IPA. Of course, we still have critical hermeneutic as an important tradition. I think it's still very present in France, for instance. And Dominic Scarfone, in his introductory paper in the Open Door Review, talks about it. Peter Fonagy summarizes the Anglo-American tradition of research. And Riccardo Bernardi talks about the South American tradition, and I myself try to summarize on a few pages only the Swiss and German research tradition. So I think this part is still topical. Please, the next slide. So I also want to recommend this paper by Bob Emde and Peter Fonagy. They describe this kind of time in the 1990s with this threatening split between the researchers and the clinician. They have a very clear, very passionate analysis of the situation. And then they develop the concepts of the Sandler Conference and of the RTP. Please, the next slide. So the research committee, to summarize, we first had in the 1990s a research committee for empirical research. The chair was Peter Fonagy. And then we had all these epistemological positions, in Germany or also in France. There is a great skepticism until now against empirical research. So when Daniel Friedlacher became as one of the first French, it was not the first, but one of the first French presidents, he built a second research committee for clinical, conceptual, epistemological, and historical research. And he asked me to chair that, a very ambitious task to talk about different way of understanding research within psychoanalysis. Many colleagues helped me. It was quite a challenging task, but I think we could contribute. And thanks God, we had a very good cooperation with Peter Fonagy's committee. We did the Sandler conferences together, with the RTP together. And I think the product of that is that we now know that we live in a time of pluralism of sciences, also a time of richness, of plurality, of different forms of research in psychoanalysis. And at the Sandler conference, as Clara Schejtman will tell you, in Buenos Aires, you will have a chance, get a feeling for this kind of plurality, for the richness and for the curiosity which is connected to that. So please, the next slide. So just the Sandler conference, just to remind you, originally it was called the Research Conference. And when Joe Sandler died, we gave him the name of Joe Sandler because he was one of the visionaries of the Sandler Conference. It was from 1995 to 2007. It was at University College in London, chaired by Peter Fonagy. And because Peter was extremely busy in 2007, Annemarie Sandler asked me to organize the Sandler conferences in Frankfurt at the Sigmund Freud Institute, which was a big chance and appreciation for me. And because it was a huge support also for the Sigmund Freud Institute, I'm still very grateful. But it became a bigger and bigger success. We had mostly between 200 and 300 people, and stars, you know, like Mark Solms, Antonia Damasio, even Carl Friston came. We had a very good debate. So IPA realized, well, that's a good model. And so they asked us to rotate the Sandler conference between the three regions, which now we are 4 regions. But that's why this time it is in Buenos Aires. Just the next slide, to give you just another aspect of the vision of the Sandler conference. We tried, you know, to take psychoanalysis out of the ivory tower. We thought psychoanalysis is also a critical cultural theory. So we took up a topical, complex topics and discussed them from a clinical point of view. For instance, ADHD and the medicalization of psychic problems was a big topic in 2008. Then religion and fanatism, you know, with the growing fundamentalism, particularly the Muslim fundamentalism, but also the Christian fundamentalism. Then we took this topic up. We talked about trauma, dreams, early prevention, the societal kind of attempt to bring psychoanalysis to other groups of population, then the bridge to neuroscience, finding the body in the mind, or again, the unconscious. To give you just a flair, you will see in Buenos Aires, or here in Buenos Aires, we take up, we are not living in the ivory research tower, we are taking up the burning societal problems. So please, next slide. So to come to an end, I want to take up what the slide which I showed at the beginning, and you probably feel that I'm very much concerned about this attack on democracies. And that's why it was kind of a therapeutic discovery for me when I discovered the podcasts by the Thomas Mann House in Los Angeles, 55 Voices for Democracy. In analogy to the BBC speeches of Thomas Mann during National Socialism, he gave very important, famous speeches to the German audience during the time of fascism. And I can only recommend it because it is very condensed, intellectual from all over the world who try to hold something against this threat of democracy. I just want to mention one by Timothy Snyder. As you know, he's one of the best experts of the Ukraine and has written this important book, The Bloodland. And he makes a point which is so much hits the philosophy of the Sandler conference. He doesn't harmonize the situation. He says things are horrible, but in a certain respect, they are not as bad as they seem. There really is a future, and getting to that future and making it a good future might not be as hard as we think. He makes a plea for visions for future because I think democracy needs models of the future. I don't want to summarize him, but it's so much the spirit of the Sandler conference to try to take up the complex, hard problems of our days and try to contribute to it, to an understanding of the unconscious determinants from a clinical and from a research perspective. So I think what we are trying to do just in our small world of psychoanalysis is exactly what Timothy Snyder means. We are convinced that psychoanalysis, its vision of individual and collective future, its research and its Sandler conference can be a small contribution in this direction. I think we cannot work as an analyst if we don't have a vision for a future for the individual patient. We cannot work as a researcher if we don't think this amount of work with research always is that it helps a little bit to bring the field forward to have a better future in one research topic field. And that's why I think it is a very topical vision, which is the base of the Sandler conference, and very much would like to invite you all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you so much, Marianne, for such a lively presentation as always. And we will have the chance to address some questions to you. I just want to remember the audience that the only way of participating in this webinar is through the Q&A button on the bottom side of your screen. So now I will talk to you a little about my experience as a member of international research collaborations, as well as a member of the IPA Research Committee. I have been in close contact with colleagues from many countries for years. Whenever I meet them, I usually ask three simple questions. At your university, is psychoanalysis being taught and researched? Do your local training institutes still attract candidates for psychoanalytic training? How often is psychoanalysis taught as a treatment experience? The answers show a clear pattern. When psychoanalysis is absent or reduced in universities, fewer candidates apply to training institutes and fewer patients look for psychoanalytic treatment. In Brazil, for example, psychoanalysis used to be taught in medical schools, but it gradually lost its place. Today, it is rare for physicians to seek analytic training, unlike psychologists who still encounter psychoanalysis in their university curricula. More recently, I have noticed something encouraging. Medical schools are beginning to show renewed interest in research conducted at the frontier between psychoanalysis and other sciences. They are inviting psychoanalysts to collaborate on projects and even offering courses where psychoanalysis is explicitly discussed. This brings me to a crucial reminder. Psychoanalysis was born from the mind of an academic, Freud, in dialogue with other academics. Many people first encounter psychoanalysis at university before embarking on their own analytic experience. Keeping psychoanalysis alive in the academic world is therefore not a luxury, it is essential. The IPA has been working to make this possible. Let me highlight a few initiatives connected to the research committee chaired by Siri Gullestad from Norway. The IPA Research Grant Subcommittee is chaired by Charles Fisher from the US, and it evaluates research proposals every year. The projects must be aligned with IPA priorities and explicitly connected to psychoanalysis. Because of this, many of them would have great difficulty securing funding from universities. This is why applicants do not need to be IPA members. The aim is to support psychoanalytic research wherever it is taking place. The research training program offers fellows from all over the world an immersive experience of presenting and discussing the projects. I was a fellow in 2011. Fellows do not need to belong to the IPA, but the projects must relate to psychoanalysis. The faculty are psychoanalysts who are also university professors and researchers with extensive clinical experience and expertise in different research methods. For many, the RTP becomes transformative. Fellows not only receive deep feedback from experienced psychoanalysts, but they also enter a wider community of researchers who share the same passion for psychoanalysis. The Sandler Conference is another crucial event. Just as Marianne told us, it has hosted figures such as Carl Friston, Vittorio Galesi, Antonio Damasio. It is the only annual event exclusively dedicated to the interface between psychoanalysis and research. At Sandler, many RTP faculty present, invite researchers join, and fellows act as discussants. This combination builds bridges between research and psychoanalysis while also promoting academic careers, especially for younger colleagues. The atmosphere of Sandler is unique. It inspires new generations to take up challenging questions and to push psychoanalysis forward, both conceptually and methodologically. Just last year, for the first time, the RTP and Sandler were held in Asia, in Shanghai. The theme was the scientific basis of psychoanalytic therapy, clinical practice, theory, and research. About 1,500 people attended from many countries as presenters, discussions, or audience members. This was made possible thanks to the vision of Mark Soms, then chair of the research committee, who first suggested going to China, and thanks to Jianying Qiu, our local hostess and organizer with her team. Of course, we are concerned about political conditions, censorship, media control, and coming from Brazil, where we endured a 20-year dictatorship with censorship, torture, killings, I felt strongly that our primary commitment must always be to the subjective experience of people. In any totalitarian regime, that commitment can be profoundly liberating for those who benefit from psychoanalysis. This year, the RTP and Sandler will be held in Buenos Aires for the third time. We will continue to build panels that encourage dialogue between researchers and clinicians, as well as between international and local colleagues. I want to emphasize, nothing I am saying runs against the fact that psychoanalysis, in its depth, must also be cultivated within our non-academic institutions, the psychoanalytic societies and training institutes. Freud himself defended this, and the IPA has carried it forward. But if you want psychoanalysis to remain alive, visible, and respected in the wider world, we need strong academic connections. This includes contributing to public policies, especially for vulnerable populations. And for that, we need validated instruments, robust psychometric measures, and solid evidence of the efficacy and cost effectiveness of our work, something that randomized clinical trials and meta-analysis are already beginning to show if we want our clinical work to be funded by the state and by insurance companies. Let me end with a quotation from Freud that captures the spirit of the Sandler conference. Our first purpose was naturally to understand the disorders of the human mind. Later, however, we realized the close relations, indeed the internal identity between psychological processes and what are known as normal processes. Psychoanalysis thus became depth psychology, and since nothing that man creates or does can be understood without the cooperation of psychology, applications of psychoanalysis to numerous fields of knowledge arose spontaneously. These texts, unfortunately, met obstacles. These situations, however, are improving, and everywhere there are more and more people studying psychoanalysis in order to apply it to their own fields. Here, we may expect an abundant harvest of new discoveries. Thank you so much. And now, Clara, the mic is yours.
Hi, well, thank you, Rogério, Marianne, Isabel, and all the organizers. Well, after Marianne's wonderful account of the milestones of research in our psychoanalytical work, and Rogério's description of the IPA research activities and his inspiring experiences opening new doors in Shanghai and the Asia-Pacific region, I will address the question of staying alive in two words, the academic and the psychoanalytic, with a particular focus on Argentina. My experience as a fellow in 2003 and later as faculty member at both the RTP and Sandler conferences profoundly influenced my teaching, my collaborative research within university settings, and my clinical psychoanalytical practice. The historical context of psychoanalysis in Argentina. Argentina has a long-standing tradition of psychoanalytic thought, primarily because the first complete translation of Freud's work was into Spanish and was published here in 1922. To put that in perspective, while A.A. Brill had translated some articles into English earlier, it was not until 1953 that James Strachey and Anna Freud began the full translation of the standard edition. In 1922, Spanish edition included a prologue by José Ortega y Gasset, the renowned Spanish philosopher. He was very enthusiastic about Freud's discoveries and emphasized that Freud was a bold investigator who relied on new empirical methods, guided by a strong motivation to heal. According to Ortega y Gasset, Freud created a system based on authentic and meticulous observations, daring innovative hypotheses and original methods, all driven by a devoted and scientific spirit. We see the same spirit when Freud celebrates the inclusion of psychoanalysis at the university, while also warning later of the risks of treating it as a Weltanschauung, a worldview. He defined a worldview as an intellectual construction that unifies all the problems of our existence on the basis of a supreme hypothesis, where no question remains open and everything that claims our interest finds its precise place. Freud warned about the powerful appeal of such worldviews. They allow us to project our ideal desires, invest our affections, and feel more secure. Yet, he insisted that psychoanalysis, unlike philosophy or biology, is not a worldview. It aims to solve problems accessible to observation and therefore remains unfinished, provisional, and subject to revision. In this sense, he situated psychoanalysis closer to the natural sciences, defending its open-ended experimental spirit of inquiry through research and the intellectual elaboration of carefully verified observations. The warning highlights a permanent tension that Marianne so passionately described to us, whether to consider psychoanalysis a scientific field or an hermeneutic discipline resistant to traditional research methods. These debates have always carried the risk of producing splits within institutions, groups, research communities, and between researchers and clinicians. Bridging the gap in Latin American universities. Although psychoanalytic theories began to be studied very early in Argentina, in Argentine universities, systematic research developed much later. Two main reasons explain this delay: chronic difficulties in research funding, which remains today, and the resistance of some psychoanalysts to look beyond the ivory tower of the consulting room. My participation in the RTP in London in 2003 marked a turning point. The personal exchange with Peter Fonagy, Bob Emdy, and other faculty and fellows opened new perspectives on infancy research, and we have since, in my team at the university, developed a pioneer program that continues today. Bridging psychoanalytical concepts such as those of Freud, Laplanche, and Winnicott, which variables obtained from videotaped mother-infant interaction, was a big challenge that required careful explanation to the colleagues and initially produced ambivalence and skepticism. The support of the University of Buenos Aires and the IPA Research Board was crucial to coping with these obstacles. As Marianne reminded us, resistance to research was common. The same occurred in the field of infant research, based on detailed observation. One of the strongest critics was Andre Green, argued that focusing on observational data is an oversimplification. For him, concepts such as the unconscious or transference cannot be directly observed but must be deduced. One frequent criticism was that this is psychology, not psychoanalysis, or that the unconscious was lost in such kind of research. Yet Freud himself wrote that psychoanalysis is a psychology. And Laplanche reminded us that the infant observed by developmental psychology is not opposed but intertwined to the reconstructed mythic psychoanalytic infant. Winnicott also addressed these debates. He proposed a heuristic distinction between the early, what can be perceived by an observer before the infants are self-aware of their perceptions and feelings, and the deep, the unconscious traces of the early experiences. While observation can never capture the deep experience, both paradigms can coexist. Green's concern remained the specificity of the intrapsychic and unconscious versus the interpersonal. He maintained that observational studies offered a very little contribution to deep psychoanalytic understanding. Fortunately, this binary opposition has been overcome through the paradigm of complexity. Thinkers such as Edgar Morin have built bridges between the natural and human sciences, emphasizing that each field develops its own object of study and methods of transformation. Research paradigms in both the natural and human sciences have become less dogmatic, accepting heterogeneity and encouraging interdisciplinary fertilization. A living psychoanalysis. Bridging observational research on early videotaped interactions with psychoanalytic theories of early psychic structure has generated important findings over the past 20 years. There is now broad consensus that the intersubjective precedes the intrapsychic, and that the more we know about the relational baby, the better we can design early interventions and critical moments of psychic structuring, detecting early psychic suffering with a significant preventing impact, and at the same time, we can better understand the effects of early trauma in our severely disturbed adult patients. The expansion has moved far beyond the idea that interpreting the unconscious intrapsychic fantasy is the sole path to the unconscious. By analyzing intersubjective traces of their impact on the intrapsychic, but by working with families and groups, and by addressing collective trauma like Marianne described us, and its unconscious inscription in society, we are fostering a living and changing psychoanalysis, one committed to approaching human suffering in all its complexity. The increasing demand for consultations for younger infants presenting dysregulations and difficulties in building their self-structure led to the IPA's initiative to propose a new IPA parent-infant psychotherapy training. This program is directed to analysts and candidates, bridges the big method of infant observation, systematic research, and deep clinical work, and we are presenting this at the IPA, and the director is coming to Buenos Aires. Susan Donner is coming to Buenos Aires to talk about this also. The Sandler Conference provides a unique IPA space where clinicians and researchers can engage in constructive dialogue. Empirical, conceptual, clinical, and action research are all welcome, enriching the psychoanalytic spirit and expanding our knowledge for clinical practice. Today, psychoanalysts and researchers are exploring topics such as history, art, social and political conflicts, cultural diversity, discrimination, fanaticism, racism, gender diversity, poverty, competitive pressures, and the impact of technology on psychic structure and infant development, early interventions, and adolescent turmoil. All these issues will be addressed at the next Sandler Conference from broad research and clinical perspective. This experience is valuable not only for colleagues involved in research, but also for clinicians. As Rogério noted, the presence of a psychoanalysis linked to research in the academic world offers the potentiality for continuity across generations. The IPA Research Committee is currently funding a wide range of projects. Applications arrive from many countries, often from colleagues who combine clinical work with academic position. SEEDS grants allow them to pursue this important endeavor. I want to emphasize that all these themes are part of the different committees of the IPA, and we saw it in Lisbon with very intense debates and different positions, and also the political issue is part of our commitment with society and with our patients. The Argentine Psychoanalytic Association hosted the Sandler Conference in 2016 and 2019. And this time we are welcoming in Buenos Aires many distinguished colleagues, all of whom are engaged in both research and psychoanalytical practice. We are honored to receive such recognized colleagues, all in their fields. The keynote lecture will be delivered by David Tackett from London, presenting the results of a major European Psychoanalytic Federation project using a working party methodology. This study organized over 300 workshops with more than 1,000 analysts worldwide who sought to understand, not judge, ordinary clinician sessions. The findings reveal differences in how analysts create settings for the unconscious to emerge in what they consider valid data and in how transference templates become visible. Among the many highlights of our program, dreams, new studies by Chuck Fisher, including the meta-methodology for psychoanalytic dream theory, and Mark Solms presenting dreams in a clinical work with a brain damage patient, trauma projects on chronic depression with Marianne Leuzinger-Bohleber that will be with us online this time. Adversity and social trauma by Ruben Zuckerfeld, who owns the IPA Prize in 2025, and traumatized adolescent presenting self-harm with Lynn Stanicke. Body and Mind, Siri Gulestad will present a case with Virginia Ungar as discussant on finding the mind in the body, reading psychological states through bodily attitudes. Therapeutic approaches will be represented by Andrea Rodriguez Quiroga, will present research and clinical case on dynamic interpersonal theory, DIT, which will be the discussion by Judith Feldman from London. We will also hear about a pilot study using AI to analyze interactional patterns in dynamic psychotherapy, presented by Stephen Hao and discussed by Jianjin Qiu from China. Infancy Development Parenthood will be present with studies on adolescent mothers in El Salvador by Alexandra Harrison, early clinical intervention in my own research that will be discussed by Susan Donner, and reflections on autistic spectrum personality development by Rogério Lerner. Panels and workshops will be in Spanish and in English, addressing motherhood and fatherhood, ADHD, early interventions and research in Latin America, climate change, parent-infant interaction, reflective function and emotional availability, workshops for parents aimed to foster reflective capacities. Finally, we invite you to be part of a living open psychoanalysis nourished by research. The Sandler Conference is our space for this, not just for the scientific program, but for debates, exchange with With great effort, all the activities will have simultaneous translation and will be hybrid. So we look forward to seeing you in Buenos Aires or online, and we will have also our traditional Fellows Day with gather the RTP Fellows and a Saturday evening reception to continue a meaningful networking. So, and now I want to show a bit of the program. Sorry. Well, this is the presentation to enter the website. These are the inviters, all the presenters. This is the Argentine one. This is the international. This is the local presenters. This is our program. So if you can see it after that in the YouTube, you can see the program with all the presentation. The discussions are from the presenter and the discussant are from different countries. So we like this diversity, this enriching, hearing the difference between us and constructing and building a democratic way to think about us and to reflect about ourselves as psychoanalysts and researchers. These are the panels. And this is our city, some pictures of our city, so to make you to come with us and enjoy a fruitful meeting. That's all. Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much, Clara. Such a vivid presentation, as well as the pictures of Buenos Aires, which is a lovely city. So now I will begin to read some of the questions that you sent. And after each question, I will invite Marianne and Clara to discuss a little bit about them, and we move forward. So, as I said, I won't tell the name of the people who sent questions. They are all anonymized, okay? So a colleague asks Marianne what she thinks about the current state of academia. This colleague tells that in the US, many professors admit that they are afraid of their students who have accumulated more and more power. They know that they can even have tenured professors fired if they disagree with them. That happened to a classics professor at Princeton a couple years ago when he criticized a student group. Princeton denied that was the reason he was fired, instead using the pretext of romantic relationship he had with a student several years earlier, for which he was already punished with suspension. Further, academia is infected with anti-intellectual groupthink, which vigorously fights against some new ideas. Students are sometimes taught compliance rather than critical thinking. So, Marianne, the question was addressed to you. You have to open your mic, please. You're muted.
Well, thank you very much for this question. I feel that you share the concern. You know, I of course, being a researcher, it's always it's difficult to make so big lines as I did in my short presentation. But I think we have a historical situation which we just have to stand up. And we are so much concerned about what's happening in the US. And it is not only in the US, it's in other countries. I think consensus of a protection of science, which was essential in Western democracy, seems to be threatened in a way that many of us here would have never believed that it comes again. You know, living in Germany as a Swiss, we had been, of course, the Sigmund Freud Institute is as an institution very much connected to German history. That's another topic. But, you know, in National Socialism, of course, in a very different way, but academia was threatened as well. You know, the most well-known example is, of course, the Jewish professors who were threatened by their students and were denounced. And at that time, of course, that meant also a threat of life and death. And history never repeats in the same way. But I think we have no other chance than to learn from history and to take this beginning signs on attacks on science as you describe, you know, that a scientific institution is not anymore protected publicly. But even sometimes politics are kind of demagogically using student minds to attack critical thinking scientists. And I think it's terrible that we have a historical situation where, again, professors are afraid of their students. And I think it's unfortunately not only a fairy tale, it's just a fact. We have already quite a lot of professors from the US who are leaving the country. The Max-Planck Institute here in Germany has announced that they have a lot of asking, how do you say that in English, you know, applications from US American colleagues if they could come to Germany and make their science in a protected room. The same was in, you know, at the beginning of the Ukrainian war. You all know that. It was a brain drop. A lot of scientists had to leave Russia because they weren't alive. So I just share your concern, you know, whoever asked this question. And I think we have to speak up. And that's why, you know, one of my expertise is depression. I will talk about that in Buenos Aires. And depression has to do with a central feeling of helplessness, of hopelessness. And you have not the feeling of self-agency to can do anything against. And that's why I was so glad to discover things like the 55 voices for democracy. And we hear, of course, that there is some resistance in the States itself. But we are just scared because some of the mechanism, for instance, I don't want to speak too long, but some similarities, not Timothy Snyder, but another, well, a German sociologist has just written a book about fascism, and he has given an interview about some similarities of the development in the US, which go into some fascistoid structures with the National Socialism. He doesn't say history repeats itself, but some of the mechanisms are the same. And one is, which is psychoanalytically so true, is that the Trump administration, he creates a climate of terror. I mean, you talk about the professors who are anxious, but think of the migrants and, you know, the police coming and very arbitrary, you know, they look for people and take them out of their houses as they did in Los Angeles. It's a system of terror, and it creates an atmosphere of, you come from one catastrophe to the other. And that, of course, was studied in National Socialism. Goebbels had exactly this, or a very similar strategy, you know, working with terror, with death anxieties, with catastrophes, and the people cannot think if they are confronted with catastrophes all the time, with death anxiety, they lose the capacity to think. I mean, that's a central topic of psychoanalysis. You know, we have many concepts to create a thinking space by Winnicott, by Bion, and many others. And this leads to a dangerous state of the mind with many people who kind of makes group regressions more probably. And of course, Otto Kernberg and many others have talked about the danger of group regressions. And one danger is then that you kind of submit to an authoritarian leader. Unfortunately, we have it's very concerning. We have the right-wing party in Germany again. You know, 1/3 of the German population now votes for a party which is not anymore democratic, but is right, radical, idealizes National Socialism and so on. So I want not to be too long, but I share your concern, and I think not self-idealizing psychoanalysis. I have learned I'm not in the mind of the 68 student anymore, but I think, I don't overestimate what we can do as psychoanalysts, but I think the IPA tries at least to go into the public discourses, and many of our colleagues and the committees you mentioned, Clara, they are trying to be active in their own countries and also talk in the public and take influence on the debate. So I hope it was not too general, but I'm sharing your concern very much.
Thank you. Clara, would you like to comment something?
Maybe you want to read more questions or on this issue, or maybe
okay. I'm going to read the next one. So
yeah.
As a clinical psychologist, psychoanalytic candidate, and also university professor and academic, I always feel not enough in the eyes of colleagues. For clinicians, we're not clinic enough. And for academics, we are not scientific enough. Some psychoanalytic research uses psychoanalytic concepts, but then the methods used are borrowed from quantitative research that accesses a different epistemologic subject. That creates a lack of concordance between theory and methodology. Do you think that that's a problem to psychoanalysis, scientific identity and status? Shouldn't we focus on developing research based on psychoanalytic methods such as free association narrative interview, Horseshaw, TAT, drawing, etc., adequate to psychoanalytic research questions and conceptions? Thank you very much. Would you like to comment, Clara?
Yes. Well, I think that in this question, it is the answer. Yes, we are just doing it. Rogério can also open how wide is the variety of research and conceptions that we have today. We have clinical, the only research for psychoanalysis is not the empirical one. We have empirical, conceptual, clinical, and research action and action research. Today Marianne can talk a bit about this because it's very important today in the IPA. We are all the time in these 20 years that I'm dealing with this is working on what is the data that we obtain with empirical methods and what is the deduction or the implication for psychoanalysis, for theory, for the practice. In my practice that we work with the infants and babies, and we we got to have a very important intervention, early intervention, clinical, with psychoanalytical inspiration and concepts, and that is what is going to be also in the parent-infant training that the IPA is proposing, and we bridge concepts because the integration is in the analyst. So we are nourished from different concepts, different perspectives, and different methods, and this is the richness that we have in our practice, that we try to make better our approach to suffering and to help people with their suffering. And this cannot be so quantitative, but we use quantitative methods, we use quantitative data. We are not just believings and religions, but we make a deduction, an implication, a more complex way. And another small thing that I think that the good thing of international meetings, that we are not with our home persecutors. Each society, each community, each university, each institute has its problem. I myself didn't talk in my in my association and in the psychoanalytical spaces that I were working there about my research. 10 years after, when my research has a robust implications for clinical work, and I could work theoretically what is good from my research, I began to talk with the psychoanalysts. So, and I think, and today everyone likes my research and everyone likes everything, but we have today a consensus that the intersubjective is intertwined with the intrasubjective. It's not a different word. The baby, the family, the society, the pediatrician, the rearing time today. In my time, infants don't sleep with parents. Today, infants sleep with parents. We are working on this because we need to make implications, analysis, theoretical contributions from research to psychoanalysis.
Mm. Oh, yeah, you had a very passionate view of this problem. I just want to, I'm so touched that you say, I think we all know these feelings, trying to bridge psychoanalytic practice to the university somehow in one person, that we feel kind of always, as you said, insufficient as a clinician. And, you know, many clinicians tell us, well, you have, as a university professor, you cannot do so many psychoanalysis. So you are not a good analyst, yeah? And of course, in the academic world, it's not so easy, it's hard. So, but I want to motivate you to look for the community, as just Clara said. That is the vision of the research committee of the Sandler conference, is to help the younger generation to try to kind of cope with this tightrope. The tension remains, but that is very psychoanalytic. At least we can share our thoughts, our pain about our fantasies, and then you can cope with it better. And allow me just one remark. I mean, being on this tightrope, that is a difficult position, but can be very enriching on both sides. You know, for me, good clinicians, they are never sure if they are good clinicians. You know, if you start having this doubt, in my personal view, you are not a good analyst anymore. You become an ideologist or kind of have a narcissistic defense. So, I mean, this tightrope, it may help you also as a clinician to be modest. I hope I could transfer this. The modesty, I think, belongs to us. and it belongs also to good research. I mean, the brilliant researchers, they are still full of skepticism, of curiosity, of not knowing. These are the good researchers. So I think there is a commonality of a good researcher and good clinicians. It is this basic attitude of not being religious, but having a research attitude of trying to stand, not knowing. You know, Bjorn wrote about this beautifully. But that's, well, I hope you understand. But we want to support the young people. We are glad that you are a person who still tries to do this bridge. Yeah.
As well as to address psychoanalysis from various standpoints. We have some research done conceptually, some research done in the clinical work of psychoanalysis, but we also have some research done with psychoanalysis with other methods, which is very important and interesting for psychoanalysis as well. I have a question which was addressed to me. Does your training institute accept academics for full psychoanalytic training? I'm afraid I don't quite understand this question, because many people they graduate in universities and then they seek psychoanalytic treatment. So in this sense, they are academic. Some of them are still studying as master students or PhD students, but this is not necessarily so. In Brazil, there are many professions that might apply to a psychoanalytic training. So the next one, we have someone who is thanking for this reminder of the past, traumas and all, and that there is hope going forward, such as in research in psychoanalysis. And they are telling that we are very good presenters, and this person is grateful for this specialty that is being showed in this area and this era. So there is another question. It's kind of, I will make it shorter because of time constraint. There is a reminder that academia is not always friendly toward new ideas, no matter how much evidence supports those ideas. It's the old story of resistance to paradigm shifts. Yes, we have addressed this. We have nowadays universities a set of conflicts that have been addressed during this webinar, so I will move forward. So I want to ask if there are differences in how we think about interdisciplinary research work with the STEM fields versus the humanities, and how that plays into the IPA's efforts to further research connections. Marianne, would you like to begin?
Oh, I love these questions. You could make another webinar about each of them. Yeah. Well, I think the question of interdisciplinarity, that has changed. I think many of our clinical colleagues, at least compared to when I made a training, but that's a subjective field. I didn't study that empirically, but I think they have become more open. I mean, we had in the IPA conference, the opening lecture was about South African, I think she was historian, or was he a social scientist? Or we had invited Antonio Damasio to the IPA So the interdisciplinary...
In Los Angeles, we invited Antonio Damasio.
Yeah, we had it many, so I think this has made it open. But, you know, everybody who has really done interdisciplinary research, really research to make a project together, oh, that's hard.
And Marianne knows this very well because she conducted a study, the LAC study with the CBT people, side by side with the psychodynamic people, an RCT, a very rigorous one in terms of methodology. I don't know if you want to tell a little bit about your research, Marianne, and then mode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think we should keep the time for other questions, you know, but I'm glad. I mean, you can mail to me. I give you, I think the luck study.
You will present it in the Sandler.
No. Yeah, well, you know, the real comparison with the CBT people, but if you do the research together, that you have to respect the other in a psychoanalytic sense as another object, not as a narcissistic self-object. And I mean, that was hard, and I don't want to harmonize or idealize it. But I think I was lucky because I kind of, as a person, I respected and liked the CBT person. We had hard battles, and you know, it was always, I needed an analytic session afterwards. You know, when this, you know, we were very friendly, respectful for each other, otherwise we wouldn't have managed it, yeah. But when we presented the study in the CBT field, of course, he became CBT people, and he tried to devaluate psychoanalysis. And to be honest, I invited him to our society. And of course, I wanted to know that the psychoanalytic colleagues knew that I didn't betray psychoanalysis and that we are better than the CBT. So, I mean, it's necessary. I think it's absolutely necessary in research to do interdisciplinary learn. But you need a good psychoanalysis to do it properly. Sorry. I mean, the mode study, if someone is interested, I will present it in Buenos Aires. The luck study is published, and we are very glad, if I can mention that. I mean, research needs so much time. Now, a young colleague of ours, research is also intergenerational. That's why I loved your question about the young colleague. We old people, we couldn't do it without the young ones. So a young doctoral student, she took the data of the luck study again, and what did she find? What we didn't find. She found a significant differences between CBT and psychoanalysis. We are better than the CBT people, even in respect to symptom reduction for traumatized patients. And it was published in the British Journal of Psychiatry. And that was good for psychoanalysis. Even in the media, we had, I think it was The Guardian who had a headline, "Psychoanalysis beats CBT." And I think sometimes you need that. But it was such a lot of work. And that's why I think we just need teams. We need intergenerational commitment. And I think we need the spirit of the Sandler conferences. That's why I'm so glad that so many young people are coming. Perhaps not just one remark, the dialogue with the neuroscience. You know, I showed Habermas. At my time, that was forbidden. You didn't believe in psychoanalysis if you were interested in neuroscience. I wasn't interested anyway, so I didn't. But that has changed. Mark Solms has founded a large new society in neuropsychoanalysis, and you should go to one of these conferences. So many young people who are interested in neuroscience, but also it's an open door to psychoanalysis. So I think times are changing. They, as Timothy Snyder said, they are really dark now and dangerous, but there are some signs of hope also in our field.
Thank you, Marianne. There is a question regarding the models of training in psychoanalysis. Could you please comment on the challenges that could be developed for the strengthening of research capacities within the Eitingon model for training or others? As a candidate, I feel that it has no meaningful place. It depends on individuals, or it is postponed when one finally completes the program. What kind of symptom is this?
Mhm. Who wants to
I think
answer
Marianne is the best one to answer this
No, but I don't want
question.
to. I would like if you would, or if Rogério. I mean, I don't want to talk so much. Yeah.
No, but you have a lot of experience, and I think that you have a very good point, Marianne, on this also.
Well, that would be a topic for another webinar. You
Yeah.
know,
Really.
what shows, I take just one little tiny aspect for our topic of the Sandler conferences. You know, this conflict between the different models, the different training models. You know, that was in Buenos Aires 2017. Stefano Bolognini was president at that time, and they decided to open up, to allow the Eiting model not only to be 4 or 5 sessions, but 3 to 5, and to accept the French model. And because this of different history, there was a lot of furious debates. And what I think is terrible in the history of psychoanalysis, always when you have this crisis, you tend to split. We had the threat, if you accept these different models, we will have a split, yeah? And that is the good news now, that the IPA board said, well, that is a research question. Let's make a study about that. And that's why we did the mode study, where we are investigating that. But I cannot cover, I think you are interested, if you could integrate your interest in research with a full training in the Eitingon model. I mean, we are doing that all the time, but that is, I think it's a local culture trying to help people who want to make an academic career, to help them to make this tightrope, to be in full psychoanalytic training. At least at the Psychoanalytic Institute, we try to help them, to support them. I don't know where you are, but glad to write to me. I think you need an international network to support you, but also a local network. I want to leave it with that. That would be a topic for another webinar. Yeah.
Yes, but in this sense, I just want to comment that the Latin American Federation of Psychoanalysis began to supervise research projects to help people to prepare submissions to the grant rounds of IPA. And the Brazilian Federation of Psychoanalysis is beginning its first RTP in Brazil this year. So this spirit is evolving and giving some fruits now, here and then. Clara.
No, I just to say that even the training today has the question what is happening with the online sessions or not online session, and the IPA is committed to a action research on this issue that has different perspectives. So things are moving. Psychoanalysis is live, and the IPA, I think, is live, and in each country, in each institute, we have different problems. We have economical problems, and we have how much the population asks for psychoanalytical treatments. In our country, we have a lot of work. Parents prefer to come to psychoanalysts, not to CBT. just, for instance, till now, maybe that sometimes we have waves of threatening to psychoanalysis, but what we're doing is we try to be more flexible to the demand and to work with the problems that people have. And with our psychoanalytical knowledge, I think that we are so deep, so we have different resources in different circumstances. I supervise young people that work in very, very poor people, and they are trained and want to, they are not in the institutes now, but they are working with the children with a psychoanalytical perspective. They are doing postgraduate courses, and they use it very, very, very fruitfully. So we are live and in change. And as Marianne said, not knowing what are all the results. We're researchers that don't know how will be the. I read a paper, a very interesting paper of something in the sciences that wrote a paper telling that the results were negative. And it was the first paper that somebody was accepted to publication telling that the result was negative. So this is a good result also, to have a negative result in science, no? Well, let's just to keep thinking.
Thank you. Thank you, Clara. I'm afraid there are many other questions that we didn't have the time to address to the speakers, but it was a very good initiative. I hope that we can meet again, and I hope that we could convey some of the spirit, the atmosphere of Sandler, as to make people interested in connecting with these or future editions of the conference. I'm afraid it's time to close now. So I want to thank my friends and colleagues, Marianne, Clara, and Isabel, and Arthur, and Augustine, who gave us this opportunity, and all the audience. The questions and the commenters were very good, and we hope that we can meet again.
Mm-hmm. Okay, bye-bye. See you in Buenos Aires or online.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.